Howdy, today on Flippin Science, looking at thermoregulation and glucose regulation. Thanks to Sam Moyle for producing this PowerPoint. So science understands we're going to look at, compare the action of insulin and glucagon in blood sugar regulation, describe how diabetes mellitus can result from a hormonal imbalance, describe the action of thyroid-stimulating hormone and thyroxine in metabolism, describe the role of thyroid-stimulating hormone in the production of thyroxine, and explain how the nervous and endocrine systems work independently or together to control body temperature and maintain blood sugar levels. So let's start by looking at glucose regulation or blood sugar regulation. So let's talk about diabetes. Diabetes is a disorder that means the body's ability to produce or respond to the hormone insulin is impaired. Insulin enables all cells, except for brain cells, to uptake glucose and store it in a compound called glycogen. The glycogen is just lots of glucose stacked together. Islets of Langerhans cells in the pancreas secrete the peptide hormone glucagon and also the hormone insulin. Alpha cells secrete glucagon and beta cells secrete insulin, and these are antagonistic. Glucagon causes you to release sugar into your blood. Insulin causes you to absorb sugar from your blood. So they're antagonistic. They fight against each other. So insulin causes uptake of glucose from cells and turning it into glycogen. Glucagon turns glycogen into glucose, and then that's released from cells. Using negative feedback, blood glucose levels determine the relative amounts of insulin and glucagon secreted by the islet cells. So we get a balance. So if you have low blood glucose levels, the pancreas releases glucagon from the alpha cells in the pancreas. Glucagon flows through the blood and goes to places like the liver. The liver has receptors for glucagon on the cells of the liver. And the liver stores an awful lot of sugar in the form of glycogen. So the glycogen is turned into glucose, and then that glucose is released into the blood, and that gets you back to your normal blood sugar level. If you have high blood sugar levels, your pancreas releases from beta cells in the pancreas insulin. Insulin tells cells to absorb sugar from the blood. So fat cells, for example, can be taking up glucose. That reduces the amount of glucose floating around the blood and gets you back to your normal glucose concentration. This diagram over here is showing the same idea, but it's showing it as a continual cycle. So you might have a peak, and then you might have a trough, and then you might have a peak, and then you might have a trough. So by having a homeostatic mechanism, that keeps the blood glucose level at around about 90 milligrams per 100 mils, or 900 milligrams per litre. That's about the concentration of blood glucose. That's fairly consistent, as long as you don't have issues like diabetes. So there are two types of diabetes. Type 1 diabetes used to be called juvenile diabetes. It's insulin-dependent diabetes, and what that means is your immune system has attacked the islets of Langerhans cells in your pancreas, and means that they don't produce insulin anymore. So you just don't produce insulin. In type 2 diabetes mellitus, so this is non-insulin dependent diabetes, it can be caused by a deficiency of insulin, but it's more commonly caused by the cells in your body not responding to the insulin that you're producing anymore. In either case, what's happening is your ability to control your blood sugar level decreases. So we're getting imbalances in hormones. We might still be producing glucagon, but we might not be producing insulin, for example. So what that means is your ability to control the blood sugar levels and maintain homeostasis is affected. If you're not producing any insulin, then once you get a high blood sugar level, it's very hard to reduce that because you're not producing insulin that tells your cells to absorb glucose from the blood. If your cells aren't responding to insulin because you have type 2 diabetes, then you might be producing some insulin, but your cells aren't getting the message from the receptors saying absorb the glucose from the bloodstream. Either way, your ability to control the blood glucose level is decreased. Let's talk about the receptors and effectors. So the receptors for blood sugar level are found in the pancreas itself. There are chemoreceptors there that can detect the amount of glucose in the blood going through the pancreas. So insulin causes liver cells to convert glucose to glycogen, which is stored in muscles and liver. So the cells absorb glucose, the glucose is turned into glycogen, which is just lots of glucoses joined together. It can be stored in muscles and the liver. Fat and muscle cells also uptake glucose too. So insulin decreases blood sugar levels. Glucagon receptors are found in the liver too, but again, found in most cells around the body. That converts glycogen back to the glucose, which is then released in the blood, and that causes blood sugar levels to increase. So how does the glucose get across the cell membranes? It's carried by transporter proteins called GLUTs or GLUTs. So what are the effectors in this loop? It's liver cells, muscle cells, fat cells. Cells that are absorbing or releasing the glucose into the bloodstream or from the bloodstream. Now in terms of managing this is all done through hormones. There's not much in terms of the nervous system being involved in this process at all. It's all done via the pancreas, and it's all managed via the pancreas. So it's just maintained by hormones all the way through. Let's talk about thermoregulation now. So thermoregulation is talking about how you maintain your body's temperature. There's two big types of organisms. They're endotherms and ectotherms. So some organisms generate their own heat using metabolism, and they're called endotherms. We are endotherms. We maintain our own body temperature around about 37.5 degrees all the time. Other organisms require heat from external sources, and they're called ectotherms. So they don't manage their body temperature in terms of running their metabolism at a specific rate all the time, or changing their body's metabolism to go higher or lower to keep your temperature at the same level. They use things like the sun. So let's have a look at this. So here we have our bobcat, so it's a mammal like us. It doesn't really matter what the ambient temperature is. The temperature is going to be around about that 37 degrees, probably a bit higher it looks like for a bobcat here, probably 38 or 39 degrees. It's fairly consistent, and that's independent of the external temperature. Whereas a snake is an ectotherm. It relies on the external temperature of the environment to maintain its body temperature. So if it's 5 degrees, it's going to be about 5 degrees inside its body too. There's not much difference between the temperature of the environment and the internal temperature of the snake. So since we are endotherms, we can do this thermoregulation. And part of our thermoregulation relies on the nervous system and the endocrine system working together. So blood temperature is regulated by the thermoregulatory center in the hypothalamus. This is the receptor. It's a part of the brain. Blood is flowing past it, and the thermoreceptors detect the temperature of the blood passing past the hypothalamus. Any fall in temperature away from 37 degrees Celsius is detected by the thermoregulatory center, and that stimulates a few things to happen in the body. Shivering, this is a nervous response. Nerves go to muscles and cause them to contract. Constriction of blood vessels, which is called vasoconstriction. This conserves heat because it directs blood away from the surface of your skin where it's going to be colder outside, so you lose heat energy on the outside, and it redirects the blood to core organs. Things like your digestive system, your heart, your lungs, and so on. This is why if you get shock, you get cold, because you're redirecting blood away from your skin inside you, and that's why you feel cold if you get into a shock system. The key bit in terms of thermoregulation that we're going to look at in this presentation, though, is the release of hormones that stimulate the thyroid gland to secrete thyroxine. And that stimulates cell metabolism. What that means is if you have high levels of thyroxine in your blood, you burn more sugar in your body cells. If you have low levels, you burn less. All of these systems work together to lead to an increase in your body's temperature. And it's also a negative feedback loop, because if you're doing this, your temperature will start to rise, and you'll get back to around about 37 degrees, and that means these things will start to reduce. So it's a 45-degree day, you probably won't be shivering too much. So this is all managed through negative feedback at the end of the loops. Now, what happens if you get hot? So if you get hot, again, the thermoregulatory center in the hypothalamus detects the increase in blood temperature. So nervous impulses go to sweat glands to secrete sweat, and when that happens, your sweat evaporates away, and when it evaporates away, it takes heat energy away from your skin, and that cools you down. Nerves go to the muscles at the start of capillaries and tell them to relax, and what that means is that you get vasodilation, so the capillaries dilate close to your skin. That means more blood goes to the skin, so again, more heat energy gets taken away from your skin, and that cools the blood. And in terms of what we're looking at in terms of hormones, the thyroid gland reduces the amount of thyroxine that's secreting, and that decreases cell metabolism. So you're not burning as much sugar, and if you're burning less sugar, you're generating less heat, and that will cool you down. So these mechanisms all work together. So we've got some nervous system action, and we've got some endocrine system action to decrease your body's temperature. And again, it's negative feedback. Once your body temperature gets low enough, you don't want to continue sweating for a very long time, because if it's cold outside, that will make you very cold, and that could be very dangerous for your body. So we use negative feedback. The output reduces the input. So in this case, the high temperature is reduced, and that goes down to a lower temperature, and that reduces the input to the point where the homeostatic mechanisms start to cancel each other out, and the body temperature remains fairly stable. This picture is showing those other homeostatic mechanisms that don't involve thyroxine. So if we look at, say, temperature being decreased, we do things like shivering. So this is run through the nervous system, going to muscles. Also vasoconstriction. This is nervous too, because there's little muscles at the start of the capillaries that close them off. If they close off close to the skin, then that blood doesn't go close to the skin. It goes deeper inside your body and keeps your heat inside your body. This leads to an increase in temperature. If it is hot, then the hypothalamus will redirect the body to do things that are the opposite of this. So we'll dilate those muscles at the start of the capillaries close to your skin, so we get vasodilation. Blood goes to the surface of the skin. That starts to cool you down, because heat energy leaves from the skin, goes into the environment. We release sweat from glands, and again, this is triggered off by nervous action, and that leads to your body temperature decreasing. So this is other mechanisms that change your body temperature that don't rely on the thyroxine. So let's look at what happens with thyroxine, because we're going to be talking about this in a bit of detail. So the hypothalamus detects a drop in body temperature. That leads to the anterior pituitary releasing TRH, which is thyrotropin releasing hormone. So this is released by the hypothalamus, and then that's picked up by the anterior pituitary, which then releases thyroid stimulating hormone, which is TSH. So now we've released this hormone into the blood, and that travels to the thyroid gland, which has the receptors for the TSH. This leads to thyroxine being released. So T3 and T4 here, these are our thyroxine molecules. These thyroxine molecules travel around the blood, they dock with receptors in specific cells that tell those cells to start burning more sugar. So metabolism increases, more sugar is burnt, so more heat energy is being generated by the body just through burning a bit more sugar than it normally would. This leads to an increase in body temperature, and we get back to homeostasis. If we get back to having low body temperature, we'll just go through this again. Now, if our body temperature gets too high, what will happen is we'll decrease the concentration of thyroxine being released. So the amount of TRH here and TSH here will decrease, so that we're not producing as much thyroid stimulating hormone. And this is how we get back to our balance. So here's the hormone pathway again. So thermoreceptors in the hypothalamus detect that change in body temperature, for example, a drop. The hypothalamus releases, now here it's called thyroid releasing hormone, but its technical name is thyrotropin releasing hormone, and that stimulates the anterior pituitary to release thyroid stimulating hormone. So one hormone leads to the production of another hormone. That leads to the thyroid gland releasing thyroxine, and that stimulates that cell metabolism, so you're burning more sugar. That increases the heat generated inside your body. Once the body temperature starts to increase, that's detected by the thermoregulatory center in the hypothalamus, so less thyroxine will start to be produced because we don't need the metabolism to keep on burning sugar if we're already nice and toasty warm inside our bodies. Key idea here is thermoregulation is actioned by hormones and nerves. So we've got a thyroxine pathway that uses hormones, and we've got our shivering and our sweat glands, and our vasoconstriction and vasodilation that is controlled by nerves. So let's do our check. So compare the action of insulin and glucagon in blood sugar regulation. Describe how diabetes mellitus can result from a hormonal imbalance. Describe the action of thyroid stimulating hormone and thyroxine in metabolism. Describe the role of thyroxine stimulating hormone in the production of thyroxine. And explain how the nervous system and endocrine systems work together independently or together to control body temperature and maintain blood sugar level. So today on Flippin Science, we looked at thermoregulation and glucose regulation in the blood. That's it for Flippin Science today. See ya!